So assuming that you're able to get this, if you were to, I just modified this behind the scenes. If you were to run this out now, you should get a nice board of just black and white spaces. And by the way, top left corner is, I think by chess standards, is always going to be white, just to keep that in mind. So when you get to this point, the next parts aren't going to be too bad. And I want you to try and think about, again, pause the video if you feel like you know what to do. We have a board of black and whites, right? But I want you to also think about what else we have. We also have our original board. It still exists, the one with ones and zeros. What's happening? Oh, it's because I did something else. Yeah, so our original board still exists, the one with ones and zeros. So using this, do you think you have any ideas of how to change up our black and white boards to our new a new modified board? So I'm assuming that you had a go at it, and the idea isn't too bad. Using our new black and white board and using the old board, think of it like this. Whenever you have a solution with our old board, we're still going to have that board in memory. So we say, alright, look at the old board, it's just zeros and ones, right? Whenever you have a 1 and you're on a black space, make a different color. So this is a white space. So if you have a 1 and you're on a white space, let's go to white space black queen. And let's say you're on a, oops, let me change colors again. And let's say we're on a black space and we have a white queen. Just go to a black space with white queen. So before we move on to the next big part of our program, I just want to move over to the code and show you what exactly it is you're going to be doing for this part. So this is our double for loop, like we were saying before. Double for loop. I's are going to be our rows, J's are going to be our columns, just like how we said before. This is where we're going to be setting up the black and white board, where it's just going to be all black spaces and white spaces. The part in here where we show our fancy board, don't worry about all this. The part where we're going to be showing our fancy board is when we're going to be looking at our old board and seeing if there's either a 1 or a 0. Again, 0 is just going to be showing our black or white spaces. But if we have a 1 in our old board while we're on one of those spaces, we're just going to point to either one of our black space white queen or white space black queen. Yeah, they're named up here. So white space queen or black space queen. Alright, so now that we've covered this problem, it's time to attack our next big problem. And this might be more difficult than what we were dealing with before. So, how do we actually print this thing? How do we print? So it's not going to be as simple as we have with the old board, where it just prints all the columns and rows and all that. So when we're looking at this, it's actually not too hard to figure out step by step how we should be doing this. And again, I encourage you to give this a good shot at yourself. A good shot for yourself. So really think about it. What are we doing before we do all this? So I assume you had to go at it. And again, think about it. We have our pointer board, right? The fancy board that has all the pointers to the boxes. So we're going to go through that one by one, right? And then point to each one of these. And then once we get to each one of these new representations, we want to print each one of these out, column by column. And then, before we move to the next row, we jump to our next column in the fancy board. Then we print out all of those of just the top row. Then hop over to the next one. So once we get to the end of this row, we hop down to the next part. And we do all these, so on and so forth. So if we put an order to this, and again, if you feel like you got it, take a break, try and figure it out for yourself. How are we going to write this out? We want to first do column by column of the box, right? That's the first thing we want to do. We want to do all the columns of the box to get to the end of the row. Then we want to move to the column of the fancy board, right? So we want to do all the columns of the box, then move on to the column of the board, then move to the next column of the board and do all the columns of that box. And once we finish all that, we're going to move to the next row, the row of the box. So once we finish all the columns of the box, then the board, we're just going to move on to the next row of the box. And then once we finish with all the rows of the box, we're going to move on to the next row of the box. The next row of the fancy board. So we want to do this first, and this first, and this first, and that. And still, I mean, the answer might not jump out of you. So this is the first thing that we want to do, and then this, so on and so forth. But we want to have this. I'm about to give you the answer, so if you want to pause, go for it. We want to have this as the innermost of our nested for loops. So again, as we're going through this, we're going to have for loops. And the column of our box is going to be their innermost nested, then this one, so on and so forth. So let me help you out a little bit with how this is going to actually look in the program. So we're going to have something like fancy board. And then we're going to have some indices. So I want to talk about just what this is first off. Remember, what is fancy board exactly? Fancy board is a 8x8 of our pointers to type box, right? So these two are just going to be our indices for fancy board. That gets us a pointer. So this by itself is just going to return a pointer. So what we're going to do is we're going to put all this in parens and then dereference it, right? So that this gets us a pointer to our array. And then just in here, these are going to be our indices for row and column of our pointer. So again, this is just going to be pointer to box, and this is just going to be the indices for our actual box. So it won't be as simple as saying I, J, K, L, and just throwing I, J, K, and L in here. What's going to end up happening is these are going to be incremented in different ways. So let me say it again. Each one of these, I, J, K, and L, is going to be going into each one of these boxes. But, just because, and this isn't necessarily true, if I and J go here, I'm not saying that I and J do go here, I'm going to let you figure that out for yourself. If I goes here and J goes here, it doesn't necessarily have to be that I gets incremented last. So if L goes over here, K, J, and I, it doesn't necessarily have to be that this gets incremented first, and then once this maxes out, this gets incremented, and this goes back to 0. That's not necessarily what has to happen. So a real big part of this assignment is going to try and figure out in what order should these go up, in what order should these increment, and which one of these variables should go where. And finally, all of that is going to go right in here. Again, everything that we program in here, those 4 nested for loops, are just going to be thrown right in here. And again, if you want to try and test this out, you can try printing out the regular board without all the fancy stuff, and just call that with just solution S, and then just solve queens with, oh, not solve queens, just show the fancy board.